Oh, bonjour, and welcome to my trading post, because today, on Tales from History, we're going to be talking about the founding of the city of South Bend, which, as we all know, was started as a fur trading post. So as the year 2022 closes and we start to approach 2023, we're actually approaching the 100th anniversary of the founding of the city of South Bend. Now you might be sitting at home and saying, well, Kristie, did we not just celebrate South Bend 150? Well, yes, we did, but that was the incorporation of the city. And so this anniversary that we're looking at coming up involves the founding of the first kind of commercial venture in the city, that being the fur trading post founded by Alexis Coquillard. Now, in the 1820s, this whole area, the St. Joseph River Valley, was part of the French fur trade. We had Fort St. Joseph, which had been demolished a few decades before north of here in Niles, and people like Pierre Navarre had built a trading post in the area as well. And so Alexis Coquillard came to the south bend of the St. Joseph River to help seek his fortunes, and decided to build a trading post right here in town on the river. And so that happened in 1823, and then he built his home with his wife and his family in 1824. And for most intents, that's considered kind of the founding of the city. Now, Kristie, you might ask me, what about Pierre Navarre and his cabin? Wasn't he the first in the area of European descent? Yes, he was the first in St. Joseph County, but since his cabin was on the other side of the river, it wasn't considered to be in the city for a long time. The city limits didn't go that far. And the current location in Leaper Park is not the original location, so it was actually too far away to be considered in the city. And you might also say, well, Kristie, were there not people here before those folks came? Of course there were. There were an estimated 4,000 Native American people living, and their whole families here, lots of villages in the area, and the people like Coquillard had come to trade with the native people as part of that kind of economic empire that the French were setting up at the time. So Coquillard's first trading post was described as being about 200 feet east of what's now the end of Washington Street downtown, which puts it about in the middle of the South Bend Museum of Art. And shortly after, he moved it to a little bit further up the bank of the river to the corner of Washington and Michigan Street, which is where Cafe Navarre is today. So if you're ever there, you can see the marker that was put up by the Indiana Historical Bureau and learn a little bit about the history of that area. He was shortly thereafter joined by Lathrop Taylor, who was another trader interested in trading with the native people in the area, as well as Taylor was much more interested in kind of starting that city, of plotting out those pieces of land and starting a post office. He was the first postmaster in the city, and other civic-minded things like that. So he worked with his friend Coquillard to kind of basically start the city. So fast forward about 100 years, and in 1920, an editorial in the South Bend Tribune suggested that the city celebrate the 100th anniversary of that founding of the trading post. The thought being that instead of some civic holiday like the city's incorporation, this founding of the post and people coming out west would elicit people's imaginations a little more. And so fast forward a couple years from there, and the Chamber of Commerce took up that idea. They said, yes, we're going to do this. But then they said, well, we're not actually going to do this. We're going to appoint somebody else to do it. And they got a committee together. They had a recreation committee and appointed a man named George Beitner to head up the centennial festivities in 1923, as they put it. And George Beitner didn't even know he was up for consideration, so it was a little bit of a surprise for him. But he had a record of being involved in civic celebrations and had been a part of several other large events such as this one. So after much consideration and some phone calls from Mayor Siebert, who was mayor at the time, Mr. Beitner, who had owned a very successful shoe store, but now was retired, said that yes, he would take this job on, but only if businessmen and other people in the area would be able to help him out. So he basically said, okay, but I'm not doing it by myself. So with much commemoration in the local media, kind of this celebration committee was begun, and they sought opinions from local people. They wanted it to be everybody's celebration. They wanted people who had moved away to come home and meet old friends and reminisce about their memories. They wanted all of the old settlers to be recognized and to be honored. And Beitner welcomed any and all ideas he said would be considered by his committee. So what he did was put together a committee who then put together a board of directors, who then put together an executive committee to oversee that committee, who then put together an honorary board of directors, and they all put together several other committees to oversee specific parts of this celebration. So we have the Chamber of Commerce, who appointed a director, who appointed a committee, who appointed another committee, who appointed another committee, and got this other committee together to get 4 or 5 other committees together to make this celebration. So Beitner now had all the help he needed, though, as we all know, sometimes when you have quite that many committees, it gets a little bit difficult to get some things done. But fortunately for him, most of the influential business people in town were on board. Pretty much all of the men in the Oliver family were involved in one way or another. People like Colonel George Studebaker and J.M. Studebaker and A.R. Erskine, the president of that company, O'Brien from the O'Brien Paint Company. We had the Birdsall family. We had quite a bit of buy-in from the Northern Indiana Historical Society, which of course later founded the History Museum, which we are in right now. So we're very pleased to say our museum had a big part in this as well. And as the date of the celebration in 1923 got closer, they put together this fantastic series of events to last an entire week to celebrate this centennial. It was called one of the greatest celebrations of its type in the entire Great Lakes region. So what did they do over the course of this week? Well, on Sunday, of course, Sunday is the Lord's Day, so Sunday was mostly reserved for what is called in the program as centennial church services. And there was also some kickoff speeches in a very large tent that they had put up in Leaper Park for this purpose, including the mayor, including George Beitner, as well as a number of religious leaders, pastors, priests, rabbis. The president of Notre Dame gave inspirational speeches, and they sang hymns, and then went 7:30 at night was another round of centennial church services. So we are ready to start our celebration after Sunday. On Monday, things really began in earnest, and there were registrations at the Northern Indiana Historical Society, which was located in the old courthouse at the time, and all visitors had to register. It says in the program that all people from out of town had to come and register. It did not say whether or not they were even intending on attending these celebrations, but it was very pointed that you had to come and register at the Historical Society. The tent in Leaper Park was host to a number of bands, from school bands to an athletic demonstration to some other musical numbers, and culminating in a band from Chicago that they had hired to come and entertain that was followed up by fireworks in the evening. And they estimated that up to 40,000 people saw that display in some way or another. So after Monday's successful celebrations, Tuesday began with some other differently themed items. The Area Horticultural Society began their annual display, which is described in many ways as being extremely large, extremely broad, well attended. So that must have been an important part of, it seems like, every year, but as well as this celebration in particular. The other thing that was pushed very hard was what they called the Kids Circus. So before the week of celebration, which was the first week in October in 1923, they were holding tryouts for this kids circus. They wanted kids from all over the area to come and show what kind of talents they might have had. So that could range from dancing or singing to riding horses, or they even called out for kids with pets like dogs or birds who could do tricks. And so this kids circus over 2 days would showcase all these area kids and what kind of entertaining things they could do. There were also professional acts that were hired from the area to come in and kind of anchor that circus. So you'd have a professional act and then probably some of the area kids, and go on like that. So over the course of 2 days, which is how long the circus ran, the kids circus attracted about 10,000 people, so a pretty good turnout there. And the Tuesday and Wednesday's displays were also, very popular. They had special events in all of the theaters in the area and other things like that. So on Thursday, we kind of move on to the historical portion of the event. And on Thursday was the most well-attended event, which was an industrial and historical pageant. They had a big parade going through different parts of downtown with, as was described, as gorgeous floats highlighting the different businesses and industries and historical events of the area, so that people could stand on the sides of the street and kind of learn about all the wonderful things that have happened here in the last 100 years. And then Thursday and Friday were what they called a historical tableau. So it seems like actors that were acting out the history of the area that was put on in Leaper Park as well. The parade on Thursday is estimated to have been seen by 100,000 people, which at the time may have been more people than actually lived in the whole city of South Bend. So people must have been coming from all around the county in order to see what was going on as part of this great centennial celebration, which is exactly what the organizers wanted to happen. And on Friday, along with the tableau, there was also an open-air dance all along Colfax Street, from Michigan Street to LaPorte was closed, and there were bands at regular intervals along the street to play music for people to dance and have some merriment in the evening, which it was described as being a little chilly for an event like that, but still well attended. And at the end of all these celebrations, which ended on Saturday with a Notre Dame home game, and we all know to not put too many events up against a Notre Dame home game, so that was kind of the star of the show on Saturday, was Notre Dame playing here in town. It was described as being a wonderful success. They attempted to raise $20,000 for all of these events. It seems like they didn't quite meet their goal, but the hope was that with some of these that actually charged admission, for instance, the circus charged 25 cents or 50 cents, depending on the age of the attendee. They believed that they made enough money to cover all their costs and then donate the rest to the Red Cross. And the other great achievement that is remarked on in newspaper articles is that there were no serious injuries reported throughout the whole course of the event. So that must have been fairly unusual at the time. Though whenever you get 100,000 people together, you can expect somebody to trip on the curb and hurt themselves. So that must have been a great achievement for not only the Chamber of Commerce and Mr. Beitner, but all the other committees that were a part of it as well. So there was also a book put out that's called South Bend World Famed, and highlights different businesses and homes and schools and things like that in the city that they felt were worth showing to the world as what a great and growing and industrious place this was to be. So, and then after the whole city came together to celebrate that, they continued to have that pride in their area and how it was started. And the newspaper ran an entire issue on the history of South Bend and how it was founded, with biographies on all of those early settlers. So very much investment from lots of different folks. So as we come up on 2023 and the 200th anniversary, here at the History Museum, we are working on putting together some events to kind of share that pride and maybe talk a little bit more about the next 100 years and some other things. And you can look forward to seeing that in some of our galleries a little bit later in the year. So thank you all for joining me today in my fur trading post, and I hope you all have wonderful holidays.